Hi everyone, and welcome to my evaluation proposal. I'm Luke Shoemaker and I'm talking about project-based inquiry science in Mexican secondary schools. And the problem here is the dropout rate of Mexican secondary students. And among OECD member nations, Mexico has the lowest proportion of 15 to 19-year-olds enrolled in some sort of secondary schooling. And although that is a complex problem, with many factors contributing to that, OECD does list key factors, and two of those are student disengagement with school, as well as the irrelevancy of skills taught at the secondary level. And in terms of the student disengagement, two factors that could contribute to increased student engagement include the quality of communication with the students have with teachers, and also providing opportunities to engage in participatory learning. Documentation exists as well for the consequences to students' lives from dropping out. This includes associations between dropout and reduced economic opportunities and employment rates. There's evidence for increased prevalence of addiction to substances as well. Little research so far is focused on how Mexican teachers understand and implement learner-centered methods like those used in project-based inquiry science. Insights into teacher practice regarding their understanding and implementation of learner-centered methods within the local Mexican context that they will be used in will positively impact the training of future Mexican teachers. And just note that the methods utilized in project-based inquiry science, there's evidence exists to demonstrate that they are superior in terms of student academic achievement when these methods are compared to traditional methods. This quote here goes along with that in saying that STEM education, when taught through dialogic and transformative pedagogies, can enable teachers to empower students to improve their own lives. And moving on then to the program itself, project-based inquiry science is a curriculum and pedagogy together. The curriculum itself consists of 13 physical science units, which the content of which aligns with many state and national academic standards within the United States. The course is organized around the student's own construction of a few scientific models, forming the content core. The pedagogy utilizes a method that allows students to practice relevant skills, that may be relevant when going on to post-secondary education or to the professional workplace. These skills include mathematical modeling, proportional reasoning, quantitative estimation and technology, data collection and analysis, and also students are constantly communicating their reasoning in a inquiry-based classroom. This list over here is just a comparison of the inquiry-based methods utilized in the program versus traditional science instruction. So for example, in traditional instruction, students are usually passive learners. A lot of times these classrooms look like students all sitting in rows individually facing the front. Whereas in inquiry-based pedagogy, students actively construct understanding. And a lot of times in inquiry-based classrooms, students will sit in pods or groups of 4 to construct that understanding collaboratively. Another example of the differences are deal with the lab work for science. So in traditional instruction, labs are often confirmatory of what is learned from lecture, whereas in inquiry-based, the labs are exploratory and the initial analysis ends in questions that will be further explored and answered as students go throughout the course. Also, in the inquiry-based pedagogy, students must account for everything they communicate. So many times students will use vocabulary words that they don't necessarily understand the meaning of. And so, and it's often the teacher's role to probe the students and making sure they know, what they're saying, right? What do you mean by that? What do you mean when you say waning is an example of something a teacher may ask. The inquiry-based methods also it's a coherent curriculum, okay? So in terms of traditional science instruction, the topics can appear fragmented, right? Just, fragmented and, simply following the order from a textbook, whereas the coherent models, they write a story throughout the academic year. Notes on how this may address the social problem in Mexico. Further notes include the superiority of the methods compared to traditional methods. And this graph here just shows the student growth in science knowledge and ability as measured by a pre and post test. Here is the traditional instruction, a growth from 26 to 42, and sometimes it's referred to as modeling instruction, but the inquiry-based methods, we see a growth from 29 to 69. Also, in terms of student engagement, modeling the inquiry-based curriculum lends itself very well to creating an inclusive learning environment, and also into building a learning community. And this, for students, can play a key role in making them more engaged versus when they are passive learners. And these quotes are evidence of that in terms of, well, evidence of that from when it's been implemented so far in the United States. The logic model of the program is presented here, and notice one of the key inputs is the initial teacher training, and this involves 60 hours of teacher training. Research supports that in order for teachers to feel comfortable making a significant change in their teaching, they need somewhere around 60 hours of training. And notice also the inputs include the resources for the materials, for inquiry-based instruction. One of the biggest challenges to Mexican secondary schools has to do with the infrastructure and the lack of materials. And notice modeling it, or inquiry-based instruction, it has some very basic materials. Lab materials are one thing, but many of the labs, if the materials are not available, supplemental labs are adequate or can be adapted for the same instructional purpose, utilizing household materials instead of the actual lab materials. The outcomes that are intended to come from this program include that teachers will learn how to implement the instructional units successfully in their own inquiry-based classrooms. A lot of times this is a heavy process for the teacher, or a process that requires a heavy cognitive load. They have to figure out how these this curriculum is going to fit with their personality, with their students. Another second outcome is that students will demonstrate superior understanding of the science concepts when compared to experiencing traditional instruction. And then also another one, students will become more engaged in school from increased sense of belonging to a learning community, which is emphasized in the curriculum. And these are the three outcomes that we intend to measure in the evaluation. So going on to the evaluation objective is to measure both the implementation and the outcomes within the same framework. The three outcomes that will be evaluated were the ones that were just highlighted. This includes the teacher implementation, the students' acquisition of scientific skills and knowledge, and how well students are engaged in their learning community. The study question guiding the evaluation includes what key contextual factors regarding teacher understanding and implementation of the curriculum are likely to affect the ability of project-based inquiry science to have the outcomes of increasing student academic achievement and engagement in school. The specific evaluation questions that will be asked are: what were the teachers' experiences in implementing the curriculum? What modifications were made to written resources during implementation to best meet the needs of students within the local context the teacher is working in? How does the measured science knowledge and ability of students with 1 year of experience in project-based inquiry science compare to students with 1 year of traditional high school science instruction? And lastly, how does student-reported engagement in school compare between students who have participated in 1 year of the program to students who have experienced traditional instruction? Okay, so for the evaluation design, an appropriate framework involves a longitudinal randomized controls trial, or RCT, with pre and post test. So this is longitudinal. It will last 1 year to both monitor the implementation and the outcomes. A randomized controlled trial is appropriate in this case. It doesn't present any ethical concern, as this program, will be phased in gradually, and implementing it to all schools at once would be beyond the current resources. So the RCT, the randomized control trial, will involve a treatment and comparison group, each consisting of 4 high schools. Schools will be chosen by lottery from a pool of eligible public high schools. All applicable science teachers will receive the initial training and ongoing supports from the program. By current standards, this is maybe about 20 teachers for each group. Assuming that each secondary teacher has 140 students throughout the day, this will make a sample size of 2,800 students for each group, which is sufficient for statistical comparison. And then for one measure, we'll have a smaller group, the teacher implementation, measuring and monitoring that. It will be feasible to only include 10 teachers for the collection of qualitative data. These 10 teachers will be selected purposely from the pool of 20 making up the treatment group of the RCT. The teachers will be selected to represent varying local contexts within Mexico. So for example, we may want to see a difference between rural and urban school settings, so that's why we will purposefully select those 10 teachers out of the 20 in the RCT treatment group. The data collection procedures. For one measure, the academic test will measure the student science ability and knowledge. This test will consist of 40 questions aligned to the objective of the curriculum. These tests are multiple choice format and will lead to quantitative data. This test will be administered at the beginning of the academic year and again as a post-test at the end of the academic year to all students in both groups. And just to know that these questions are evidence-based to probe student misconceptions, and to answer them correctly requires, the student to really think through the process and not fall into those common misconceptions. And this is coming out of Hestinus in 1995, who developed some of these questions. For a second measure, a survey will be administered to students to capture their engagement level with school and how they feel about school overall, their science class particularly. The survey will be administered once to all students in the treatment and comparison groups immediately following the post-test and the procedure above. And the idea here is that students will reflect on, their experience that they've had, in school that year, and also involve their science course. And this will give us, student-reported data on their sense of belonging. That's aided with the learner-centered methods in project-based inquiry science. And finally, the last measure that this evaluation intends to capture is the teacher implementation. And for this, qualitative data will be collected utilizing 3 methods. One is the bi-weekly, twice-monthly teacher interviews. A second method is monthly teacher focus groups. And the last is bi-weekly classroom observations. Interviews and focus groups will be semi-structured and focused on 2 key questions. One question will be on the challenges and successes each teacher is facing in implementation of the curriculum, and a second will be on modifications the teacher is making to written curriculum to best meet the needs of students. The observations will last 30 minutes each and be conducted by internal evaluators utilizing the observation rubric, where evaluators will objectively note relevant observations. Okay, and here is a snapshot of 4 things out of 16 dimensions that evaluators will look for. And this data will finally be analyzed for themes once it's collected and transcribed. And this concludes how we will evaluate those 3 outcomes, and here are the references. And thank you for listening to the talk.